I want to do a video today all about Bumpsteer and Ackerman. I've done videos in the past about it, but this time I have actual pictures and diagrams on Bumpsteer gauges, Ackerman gauges. It's so important. Let's talk a little bit about Bumpsteer.
I've spent the last 30 plus years working on race cars, building race cars, and racing cars. And I'm here to help you better understand racing technology.
The first thing I want to do is I want to define Bumpsteer and Ackerman. I think most people have a pretty good idea, but I want to make sure everyone is all on the same page. Bumpsteer is defined as your car goes through holes or bumps and the suspension goes up and down, the front tires will turn in or out. I like to bump my right front a 1/4 inch out, or maybe even 0.8 inch out. Left front, you want to bump to 0. You don't want to bump that left front at all. You want the left front 0, and you want your right front maybe 0 or bumping out. You want to make sure that it's basically a toe setting. So you want to make sure, I always thought, to keep your toe the same. So as your car's going through bumps, your toe's not wandering around. Ackerman is when you steer your car and the tires will actually turn more one way than the other way, and you'll actually toe in or out with Ackerman. When your car, if your Ackerman isn't set up properly, and I've seen this on late models, and it was a national manufacturer that had this problem, and I picked up on it, and the car was weird. We corrected it, and it corrected all the problems we had with the car. But you always want your tires towed out. Whenever tires get to a point where they're towing in, the car just gets weird, feels weird, gets sloppy. You never want your tires to tow in the front. You always want them to tow out. A national manufacturer that I know, like I mentioned, used to recommend like 3/4 or an inch of toe out statically. And I think this was to cure a problem with their spindles because their Ackerman and other things weren't set up properly. If you're ever in a pinch where you think that that thing is bent and you gotta go race it, make sure that you add a little toe and make sure your tires never toe in the front. But Bumpsteer and Ackerman is a huge thing. Make sure you check it, make sure you stay on top of it. The way I think of Ackerman, and it runs in congruence with your brain, if your car is tight, your natural tendency is to turn the car left and try to get out of tight. Well, what Ackerman does is it turns that left front spindle. I recommend 3/4 of an inch or inch Ackerman. The further you turn that left front to the left, because when you're tight and you start turning left to cure that tight problem, that slip angle that you induce by the increased Ackerman on the left front will hook and will help give your left front traction and turn your car. What it also does is as your left front loses the amount of load on it, traction will decrease on that left front. So it's only natural as the car raises up and you're decreasing your load on the left front that when you turn left, you want to put more traction back in that left front. So that Ackerman, as that load comes off and that Ackerman turns left more, it'll put more grip in that left front and help you turn the corner, especially if you're too tight. I don't like to see any Ackerman to the right, because Ackerman to the right, when you counter steer and you're going to the right, that will add scrub. You don't want any scrub. It'll feel like your car is bound up. If you set your toe, your static toe at 1/4 to 3/8, and you set your counter steer Ackerman at 0, you'll feel a launch off the corner as you've never felt it before, just by keeping that toe to a minimum. You keep it so your front end's stable, but you don't want any, and it'll take the binds right out of your car. The best bump steer gauge I've ever seen was a home-built bump steer gauge. We got ours from Baling Racing Equipment. We used to be affiliated with Baling's, and they used to own half our car. Bill Baling was a great guy. All the guys there are great. I recommend them for parts. They do drop shipping. They do everything over there. But Jeff called me up one day and he said, we got this bump steer gauge. We're cleaning out our area. Come get this thing. So I go over there, and it's a welded bump steer gauge, 2x2 steel welded. It's got adjustable little turn plates on the bottom. It's got adjustable heights for the dial indicators. It has long throw dial indicators on there, so you don't have to worry about the 1 inch of travel. I think it has 1.5 or 2 inches of travel. Get the long stem extended dial indicators for yours if you're building one. But it was a 2x2 frame at the bottom, and then it had an upright that would weld on there, and then the indicator insertion tubes were adjustable, so you could adjust the height of the indicators. The plate that would bolt onto the spindle was very sturdy, at least 1/4 inch aluminum, and it had a bend on there. It had a leveling gauge on there. You want to make sure that your aluminum is always level. You can use a smart level or any type of digital level you have, but make sure that that plate is level. Your frame is nice and level and strong. You clamp your steering arms. If your steering arms are moving around at all, it'll change the bump steer, so make sure you clamp your steering arms. I used to use vice grips. You just kind of brace them up against the frame or whatever you need to do. But make sure that your car does not steer, because you'll chase around with problems checking that thing as you're going along. So clamping your steering arms is really important on bump steer. The way you adjust bump steer is either the angle of the tie rod or the length of the tie rod. If your tie rod is too short, you'll get a curve that will go in and out because it's just too short. If the angle is wrong, you'll get a graph that will kind of do a zigzagging Z. I have an example of graphs. I used to take graph paper and draw a grid and then plot each point, I think 1/2 inch, and you raise it up. We had a bottle jack on the bottom. You can raise it and lower it with the bottle jack, and you take your measurements every 1/2 inch or so, raise it up or down to get your bump steer that you're looking for. The Ackerman gauge I recommend is the sweet gauge. I don't even know if they sell them anymore. I think they would. They were really a good gauge. But what it is something that will bolt to your spindle, and it's a long piece, 2 feet, 18, maybe 30 inches, and then it has a level on top. You want to keep that level. And then it had two arms that would go down, one for each side. One side would have pointers at the bottom. The other side would have tape measures on a swivel. And what you do is you make sure that those arms that are coming down are underneath your chassis. And you want to measure this thing so your car is at like running ride height. You don't want to measure that chassis in the shop ride height. You can. I used to measure it both ways, but you want to make sure you check your Ackerman as your left front is dropped and your right front is compressed. That will give you the biggest indication on what your Ackerman is doing. Like I said, I always Ackermaned out 3/4 to an inch on the left and 0 on the right to pull all the scrub out of it. You can build them yourself, but I really recommend the Sweet one. They're only $300, and we spend so much money on these cars and the motors and the chassis now. An extra $300 to get your car steering right is basically, it's like putting a 9/16 tool in or 9/16 wrench in your toolbox. It's just a no-brainer. So I would definitely recommend checking your Ackerman, checking your Bumpsteer, and keeping on top of it. These are really important. I have other videos if you'd like to watch them on Bump and Ackerman and stuff like that. So let's go over to the drawing board, and I have some diagrams I'm going to show you on Bumpsteer and Ackerman and what you need to check and how these frames are made and how these tools are made, and give you some more advice over there. So let's go over to the drawing board and we'll look at some diagrams. Okay, here's the first diagram I was talking about. This is what I chart when I do bump steer. And you can see that you'd put your dial indicator, you divide your graph paper up into 4 quadrants, and you can see the spindle travel here as you bump up and down. Well, a curve like this is usually like a tie rod problem, where the tie rod is too short or too long, and you can adjust your tie rod length to get something like this. Something like this is usually an angle problem, and you can adjust by putting shims or moving that angle of that tie rod to get it to kind of 0 or whatever. Like I said, on the left front, I don't mind it bumping out, but you never want it to bump in. So you probably want your curve over here on the left front a little bit. But this is how I chart it out, and I do my bump steer calculations. Bump steer does take time. It's not real fast. It's not something you can just whip through. I used to spend like a day on it sometimes and just playing around with it, trying to get it perfect. But once you get it perfect with a good set of brand new spindles on the car, and you'll have all your settings, write those down, because technically once you have that set, you can put different parts on the car with those measurements. I mean, I used to even tack my bump steer shims right to the spindle snout. So if I ever had to replace a tie rod, you'd never have to even think about bump steer shims. You just put your new tie rod on there, they're tack welded on there, and it's all set up. I would recommend, and Randy Sweet used to recommend too, every time you put a spindle on the car, if you really want to get picky, maybe not with dirt, but with asphalt stuff, you re-bump your car, because every time they weld on a spindle, they change a little bit. They're not perfect. So to get your bump steer perfect, check your bump steer often if you want to be real picky. Probably not the most important on a dirt car, but on an asphalt car, you definitely want to keep an eye on it. This is the Ackerman gauge we used to use. This is the same type of style that Randy Sweet used to sell. I know some people check their Ackerman with turn plates and it's a number of degrees. I always like the toe setting because it gets your brain into the same mode as toe. Trying to convert from toe to degrees, and you think about how many degrees I want, just too complicated. So if you think of Ackerman as dynamic toe and you use this system, I think it's the best. This is approximately 2 feet to 30 inches. This is a centering bolt that'll hook to your spindle. Here's like an example of a spindle adapter. This part would screw onto your spindle, and then this would be threaded, and you'd screw this centering bolt. I think it used to be like a half-inch bolt or something like that. You'd screw that onto here, and you want to make sure that this is level. So ours, I think the Sweet Deal had a little level up on the top. You can use a like a digital level, but you want to make sure that these are level on the car. Another thing you want to do is you want to measure your Ackerman, how your car runs on the track. I used to measure it a couple different ways. I'd measure it statically, and then I'd put the car into like a bump. So I'd raise my right front all the way up, so it would be like at full compression, and then I'd drop my left front down so it'd be at full droop, and then you measure it again, and you kind of get a feel for where the car steers at different ride heights. It takes some time if you really want to get investigating your car and what goes on dynamically. It'll take you some time, but that's how I used to do it: full compression on the right front and the left front at full drop at a bare minimum, and then start steering that thing left and right and figuring out how your toe and how your Ackerman changes as you steer the car. Here's an example of the two tape measures on the swivels. These were just pointers. You can do it by yourself. We used to have two people, one that would make sure that nothing's binding and that the left front would remain level. And then, the right front, you'd probably, pull your tape measures and actually do the measuring and keeping that right front level. Make sure that these pieces are long enough so when you got your car up in the air, you can get below the car or the frame on it. You don't want to raise your right front all the way up and then have your tape measures binding on the bottom of your car. I think this was at least a foot, maybe even you could go 18 inches, to make sure you get enough clearance there to get below the frame. You don't want to bind your tape measures up on the frame or anything else in there. We used to set ours on a hoist. We'd raise it up to, chest height, and we'd just play with it. But this is kind of what the Ackerman gauge looks like. Sweet sells them. He'll sell them with the adapter either for like a Pinto spindle. He might sell it for a metric spindle now. We had the wide 5 stuff for the late model stuff, but maybe if you needed an adapter, you could do something with a caster camber gauge has the different adapters with the bolt that goes through that's countersunk. You could use something like that if you're building your own. This is just what you kind of gotta do. Like I said, you come up with your own materials and everything, but this is just a basic. This is what the bump steer gauge looked like. And this is kind of a rear view. These down here are height adjusters. You want to make sure that this thing doesn't wobble. You want to clamp your steering shafts when you're setting bump steer too, because a lot of times the car will want to steer a little bit, which will throw your measurements way off. So I used to take vice grips, put them on the steering shaft, kind of propped in different positions, so I know my tires weren't moving or my rack wasn't moving as I was setting bump steer. Really important. I would make sure I did it the first couple times. I'm like, there's errors here that shouldn't be happening. Well, what was happening is I was getting slop in my steering, and the car was steering a little bit, and all the measurements were coming out really weird. So clamp your steering shaft. And I also checked bump steer, like I said, on the right front under compression mainly. You probably don't have to check the right front under drop, just under compression. I used to make a ride height gauge, put a bottle jack under here that would push up on the lower control arm ball joint area. And I used to, I guess, raise it up just so it's always in compression on the right front. Left front would always be in drop, maybe a little compression on the left front in case you get in and you hit a hole or something. But the left front is usually always on drop and a little on compression, but the right front I always did only on compression. Dial indicators here. This is the side view of kind of what it looks like. Long stem dial indicator. Don't use the short ones. You can if you can't find them. But in today's day and age on Amazon, you can find just about anything you need. So make sure you get the long stem dial indicators. They'll bolt. This was a piece of aluminum and it went into the frame here. I think these were 2x2 steel welded frame. And this was a big square down at the bottom. And then this top part was just like a U-frame that would weld onto the square, leveling holes. These were the adjusters for the through rods for the dial indicator stands. These heights were adjustable. So when you get it at your car at your ride height, you can adjust these to get the plate at 0. This is an example of what the plate looks like. These would bolt onto your hub, and you want to make sure that this is always level here. Like I said, the smart level, or I think ours even had like little levels in there. You want to make sure that this is level. You can set your dial indicator anywhere on these. These were marks on there. I think we cut it down to 1/2 inch increments. But you'd have your marks on there and you'd have 0. Make sure your plate is very thick, at least 1/4 inch aluminum. Ours had a little bend at the top to put some stiffness. You don't want any flex in this plate. You want this plate really stiff. So basically these would bolt to your hub. You put your dial indicator and then you use your bottle jack to raise it up and down. This is the kind of a side view. of what it used to look like. You'd have your dial indicator on your plate sides, and this would be on your hub, and then your bottle jack would be in here. This ain't to scale or anything. And you just put it up and raise it and lower it. Make sure your feet are adjusted so it doesn't wobble, because that'll throw things off. And yeah, this is how we used to do it. This is the best way I've had experience with one from Longacre and another one. I can't remember. It was all bolted together, aluminum and flimsy. Both of those were terrible. This welded steel unit, 2x2 steel square, was the best bump steer gauge I ever had. Take care of your indicators when you're done using them. Take them out. We had a little toolbox. We'd put them in and really take care of your indicators. You don't want to get them bumped or dented or bent or anything like that. So it does take time to check your bump steer well, but this was the best method that I've ever used. If you like this video, subscribe to my channel and hit the like button. It really helps me out. Um, YouTube loves it when I can do this. It'll give me better insight that you like the videos, and it'll keep me motivated to make more. I got some plans to maybe show you how I used to measure spindles and what to look for. Hit the like button, subscribe to my channel. Have a great week. We'll see you in the next video.